Here's a conundrum. How do you make an electric car that really appeals to members of the public? How do you make one that generates loads of online debate and builds up big fandoms but isn't made by some bloke called Elon? Well, maybe you make one that looks like that.
You can see what Kia's been aiming for. It doesn't look like anything else they make. It's all angry at the front, long over the top and pointy at the back.
The first thing to point out about this car is that it's very big. It doesn't look very big from the photos because of how well Kia have designed it, but this thing is massive. It is an SUV, it's not an estate car. But let's get back to that later on. This is the new face of Kia. It's the face of what Kia will become. They call it their digital tiger face, whatever that means. Enough with marketing nonsense. What it does look like is really good. Have you ever seen a Kia that looks quite like this? It's so aggressive and swoopy. It's got a drooping bonnet, a bit like an F-Type. It's got big, angry lights. It's even got these blades here, which could easily be from a Ferrari F12 TDF. And the clever design doesn't end at the front. Around the side is where it continues to be excellent, because this is a big car. It's an SUV, but it just looks long and low. It's somewhere between an estate and a saloon. It's got feature lines down the side, but there's not loads of them like so many modern cars today have. There's just one. It's got what BMW, I'm sure, will be interested in here, a little kink beside this little 3/4 panel, which makes everything look a lot better. And round the back, well, that's just like nothing you've seen on anything in this segment before. It's part Aston Martin DBX, part something completely new. There's no rear lights really to show. There's this big light bar that moves all the way down the back, and I know that's a big thing in car design these days, but it moves all the way down the back and then moves all the way down the side and then continues all the way off down there to the front. It really brings the whole car together. There's no big cluster of rear lights. The indicators are here and the brake lights are here, and that's it. It isn't just a light as well. Kia say that if you combine it with this rear spoiler that comes as standard, it helps with aerodynamics, helps the whole car to work better. It really is something that we've not seen before. And under the skin, this is a Hyundai Ioniq5, and they look nothing like each other, and that's incredible. Now, it's been a very long time since Kia made the kinds of cars that certain TV presenters made long segments about, joking about how, oh, Koreans can't really make cars, can they? Things like the Carens were a very long time ago these days. But this is the first time that Kia have made a car that's probably not just another really nice, acceptable family car. This thing is something completely different, not just for Kia, but perhaps for the rest of us as well. You see, this is the very first Kia EV built with a specific platform. That makes quite a big difference. You might think all cars are the same, all cars do the same thing, but no. An internal combustion engine car needs a lot of things that an EV doesn't actually need. You don't need an engine, you don't need a transmission tunnel if it's rear-wheel drive, you don't need any of the gubbins to do with fuel. So, well, that means if you create your own bespoke platform, you can put the batteries way down at the bottom, put the motors on the axles, and play with as much space as you want. Kia say that means this is the most spacious car they've ever made, pretty much. And they're probably right. The space in here is, quite frankly, ridiculous. It's huge. It is massive in here. I can sit quite comfortably behind myself in this car, and that I can't say about many other cars. This floating center console is a thing of beauty, but then there's nothing below it. It's completely empty in here. Perhaps the one problem is that if you spec the car with the very nice panoramic roof above me, it does restrict the headroom a little bit. I have my seat at its very lowest setting, and I could almost look out of the sunroof to drive. Like most EVs, the interior is completely dominated by its screens, which in this case are curved and take up most of the center console. They're curved to give the driver a better view of everything, basically, so I'm not 100% sure what that helps with passengers, but it's very nice for the driver. Everything else in here really has taken a step up from what you'd expect from Kia, which is, you know, never bad, but this is something else.
A bit like a Polestar, it's also vegan in here, with only vegan leather, and while it's not as nice a design as the Polestar 2, I do enjoy some of the details. This two-spoke wheel is nice and the small design line around it. The play for proper sustainability credentials continues here too. There's recycled plastics. They haven't told me which, but it's 107 plastic bottles worth. There's 490 litres of boot space as standard, but that goes down to 480 if you upgrade to the GT Line S due to the rather nice Meriden subwoofer.
The EV6 can charge at 800 volts, which means you can get from 10% to 80% in about 18 minutes. Or more importantly, if you just have that final splash to get home and you pull up and you have an 800 volt charger, you can get an extra 62 miles of range in 4 minutes, which is basically the equivalent of the time you'd spend at BP getting yourself a sandwich and a coffee. It makes an EV seem all the more realistic if you can do things like that. And it will charge at 400 volts and uprate the charging to 800 volts as it goes along. Every EV6 comes with a 165 kilowatt motor on the rear axle, and if you opt for all-wheel drive, that adds a 74 kilowatt motor on the front axle as well. Adding the extra motor does reduce range though. The rear-wheel drive car has a usable range of 350 miles, and from what we've seen, that is a realistic range that you get. Once you go up to all-wheel drive though, you do begin to lose it. The GT line has 316 miles of range and the GT line S has 300. Interestingly, those 16 miles of range disappear because the GT line S comes with 20-inch wheels. As nice as this GT line S is, I think where the real sweet spot will be is that base model Air with the rear-wheel drive. Because there's a thing called city range, which explains itself. It's how far you'll go in a city. On the Air, that is 450 miles. And put it this way, if your average commute through a city is 5 miles a day in a round trip, that means you won't have to top up your car again for 91 days.
While that impressive range will disappear quite quickly if you keep requesting everything the EV6 can do, it's worth noting how impressive some of the stats actually are. The rear-wheel drive cars will hit 62 miles an hour in 7.3 seconds, but when you add the second motor, that drops to 5.2. To put that in context, the base Porsche Taycan will take another 0.2 seconds to hit 62 miles an hour, and that'll set you back an extra 20 grand. Who would have thought we'd ever be saying there's a Kia faster than a £75,000 Porsche?
The EV6 has 3 different driving modes: Eco, Normal and Sport. But it comes on passive dampers, which means there is no change to the ride even if you change the settings. It's all about how much power is delivered from those motors. Kia says it's the stiffest car in its class, and you can both feel and not feel that. I'll explain. You can feel it when you corner, because you really can lean on the outside front tyre. It is a big car, there's no denying that, and it's got a lot of weight because it's an EV, but it doesn't feel like it's out of control, because it's a bespoke platform, unlike something like, say, a Mercedes EQC. It handles everything well and is designed to handle it. But you don't feel it when you're cruising along. It handles everything you can throw at it pretty much with consummate ease. It doesn't feel like it's an incredibly stiff car when you're just cruising down the motorway and you hit a pothole. I think it's sprung very nicely, and there's also quite a thick tyre wall on those 20-inch rims, which means it's really comfortable. The steering is heavy, nicely weighted, but I mean, it is a big crossover. It's not meant to give you much, so don't expect to be going out and feeling like you're a proper wheelmaster. The acceleration is impressive, especially for something like this, and there is a GT coming that will be even faster. Stick it in sport mode, and in reality you can dispatch almost anything on the road. It will, blow my neck, it will really go.
The EV6's other party trick is that this car can also be used as a big old battery for travel. Plug things in and it'll power them, basically. The examples Kia give are a bit odd. Apparently, you could power a 55-inch TV and an air conditioning unit for 24 hours non-stop. I've tried to imagine situations where that could happen, but I can't. Better to say that if you go camping, it'll power your radio, and if you have a power cut at home, it'll keep the freezer going.
The only thing I can really criticise about the way this thing drives is the brakes, and it's about the balance between regen and actual physical disc, there really is quite a jolt when the brakes come in. If you demand a lot of braking force, it will try and do it with the regen, but then the brakes will come in and you do find yourself pushed forward and suddenly braking more than you were expecting. So it can be a little hard to modulate the brake. However, you can control the regen using the pedals, which is quite common these days. We'll click on the right, we'll take it down, and click on the left, we'll take it up, which is backwards compared to how you'd expect your gears to be if it were gear paddles, but you get used to it pretty quickly and they do work quite nicely. There's a good amount of modulation. And to be honest, the main thing is that damping, which allows you to push it on a bit, and just the sheer traction from that all-wheel drive system, which is really sort of face-ripping at times. It's incredible. And the lack of roll through the corners for something so big is impressive.
It's probably quite hard to say just how important getting the EV6 right could be for Kia. It has to negotiate quite a minefield. There's a step up in quality, but also therefore a step up in price. A loyal fan base of Kia buyers expecting super affordable cars will quickly be turned away if there's no argument for value. But we think they've just about got it right. While the over £50,000 GT Line S is possibly too much, the entry-level models undercut almost everything that might be an alternative. A Polestar 2 is about the same price, and that comes with less space. Perhaps the Kia's biggest problem? Its cousin, the Ioniq 5, costs £5 grand less.